Hello, hello. I'm delighted today to be interviewing Lori Reising, and she is a dear friend of mine. She's also a super powerful mentor for people, and she works with energy. And we're going to be on the topic of pleasure, as we have both had periods in our life where we've been solo for a long time. And just to talk about that context of what it's like to be in the world of pleasure, but not necessarily to be in a partnership. So maybe you'd like to do a little intro and say hello, Lori.
Hello, Inarra. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on. I am super excited to chat all about pleasure. Yeah, like Inarra said, my name is Lori and I'm a transformational mentor, and I really help create more pleasure in life in every way by getting unstuck, by getting out of the stories that keep us in limitation. So, you're asking about the solo periods of.
Yeah, I think the thing is that when this is a Valentine's Day conversation, so many people will come at that as you're in love, you're in a partnership, and all of that. I want to come at different angles of pleasure and talk about what it's like to be on a solo journey. You haven't met the man of your dreams or the woman of your dreams, and how do you keep pleasure going? So we've had interesting lives, so I'd love to hear a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I feel like being on a solo journey is important for everyone, even those that are in connection, in relationship, because the solo space is where pleasure is actually born. The place when we find that depth of self love, that's when pleasure can't be conditional. That's when pleasure becomes the portal to life itself. And so I feel like it's almost a solo journey or exploration into detoxing the weaponization of pleasure that we've had in our world, where it basically holds all the weight in a relationship or something external from us. And then we respond from there. And really, when we can find that place of the pleasure within, the pleasure in all areas of our life, then it actually magnetizes the relationships, the experiences, the energies into our life that are sacred pleasure. Instead of putting those external spaces or relationships as the be all and end all that are the like activator or creator of our pleasure. So I feel like these solo journeys, even within the container of a relationship, are essential for us to actually find more wealth in every area of our life, because pleasure is the wealth portal. Like that is what I have absolutely come to in my I've been solo many times in my life, and I've been in relationship as well, and I actually welcome the solo spaces. I have no I guess what would I call it? Like angst about getting into a relationship, because I know the more that I explore my own portal pleasure, the more that that frequency rises and magnetizes what's meant to be very sacred and very aligned for me in that space.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about a little bit of the solo journey because women are often shamed being single, right? And until I read a very good book, oh my God, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's gone from my mind. I'll remember it in a sec. But it was, I get asked all the time, or have been asked in the past. So, you in a relationship. This will be at let's say, a dinner of 8 couples, and you're the ninth, and they feel really okay about asking questions to the solo person. You know, oh, you're not okay. Great. Are you dating? Have you put yourself out there? Do you smile? Do you talk to men? Do like this? And if I turn that conversation around and I said, hey, how's it going? Did you settle? Are you getting it on? How's the sex life going? Aw, is it disappointing? You're hanging in there, you're giving it a try. It would be completely and utterly outrageous considering the way that it's always single women that are considered a problem. So for me on that journey, I wonder how, if you've had some of that experience of the feeling of you're missing something if you're not with a partner.
So I haven't been with anyone for, I think it's been 5 years. We're pushing 6 years. So I kind of have to go back because honestly, I shifted my frequency around that so quickly when I did my own deep, deep healing work, even including my ageism work, like believing that, I'm getting older and oh my gosh, what if, like all of those fears that have been kind of weaponized against us as women over and over and over because if we go back even into the sisterhood wound, our worth, our survival was based on competition with each other, and it was based on a relationship. And I feel right now there's a timeline that's opening up that's actually healing that wound, where we're lifting each other up. We're no longer shaming each other. We're no longer weaponizing sexuality or relationship status. And that's not for everyone. I know I live in a world where I create a lot of high frequency states for myself. So if I take myself back to the beginning of when I consciously decided I was going to go on a solo journey, I do remember one time someone getting this close to me, and it was somebody in my immediate family, and I hadn't seen them for a long time. And he was like, "So, are you dating anybody? Are you in a relationship?" It was like they were so sad for me because I wasn't dating anyone and I wasn't in a relationship. And I remember the level of kind of shock that I had because it was like right here, it was like inches away from my face. And then his wife came in and they were both right here, and I was like, whoa, what is going on? Like, it felt so wrong. It felt so invasive, but it also did feel very judgmental. Now, for myself, I turned that around. I always turn it around. It becomes a teaching moment because I was on, at that point, I had literally consciously decided to go very solo because I wanted the frequency of pleasure to be so clear and so welcoming in my life that I no longer wanted it to be conditional. I always come back to this conditional, right? Because when we're looking for something externally, it's always we're looking for a condition to make us whole or to complete us. And that's what women have been sold over. I mean, we can go back and see why. When women couldn't have their own credit line, couldn't have their own credit cards, couldn't buy anything, couldn't vote, didn't have rights, they literally relied on a relationship or a man or whatever it was. So how can you bring that state of survival together with the glory of pleasure? Like, if you feel like into pleasure, as pleasure is actually the life portal, pleasure leads us to wealth in every area of our life, but we're starting from a place of it's not about pleasure ever. It's only about surviving. It's only about competing. It's only about one upping the woman next to you because you have no idea what will happen if you don't. Like that, that foundation alone, it takes all of us to have some kind of solo journey. Like I said, even if you're in a wonderful relationship, a good partnership, you might still be putting all of your external worth on that relationship. And so you've really got to take that time and have that solo walkabout, so to speak, to find it within yourself, to find it in the sky, in the trees, in the air, in the earth, in nature, in the moon, in the stars, right? Like pleasure in good frequency, in clear energy. Like, oh my gosh, when we get, and this is where meditation, getting into that non-resistant thought, you actually start to access the portal of pleasure within yourself, where the present moment is where everything is alive, where everything is possible. So when we stop, like I say, weaponizing or vilifying pleasure, and we start reclaiming pleasure, it begins with us. It's never going to begin in the relationship. That's always going to create a skewed frequency. I know I'm going off a little bit, so I hope
No.
I'm being clear with this. What do you feel?
I understand what you're saying. If you wanted to clarify any, please go ahead. But from my perspective, if we don't actually acknowledge what pleases us, everybody, every individual on the planet has a different makeup. They're completely unique. Pleasure for me, for instance, is sunset. Every day at sunset, I just have this hit of, ah, and it's really deep. And so much so that at a certain point in my life, when I was doing a lot of coaching, and I was coaching a lot of Americans from London, I realized that there was a swathe of people would come in at sunset. My sunset was a very busy time for the Americans waking up. And at the beginning, when I didn't feel that I had the capacity to space all of those people out or say no, for instance, um, what I did was I basically would always just allow that to run me. I'd be like, okay, I got to book this person, whatever. When I was a few years into business and realizing what really makes me work well, there was a thing about sunset. It sounds so bizarre, but not as well, that I can never work at sunset ever. It's my pleasure time. It's when I actually come into a totally different energetic, and it's all about me. It's got tinges of sort of the looking at beauty, experiencing, because it's not always like we see the sunset, but it's still true for me, that timing. And so what I had to make a excuse me, a shift in my business was to say, well, then if I'm unavailable at that time because I'm putting my pleasure first, what do I need? At the time, I needed a backup in the States who would handle some of the intros that I was doing, that kind of thing. So I put that in place. In the end, it became, I'm not working at that time ever, and neither are they. We had to reshift the entire dynamic of the day. And from doing that, I've become more successful. I've got more of the clients that I really like. I do not go into that hyper, yeah, I'm always available thing, which is corporate America. I'm not available. And just that, the power in I'm not available is such a pleasure, and going into your zone. So, yeah, maybe you want to speak into that a little bit, but that's been my experience directly.
Oh, do I want to speak into that? I absolutely want to speak into that because as I was downloading before we got together, what came through is, what I keep talking about, like pleasure is actually the portal to wealth consciousness in your whole life. And we've been trained to believe that self-sacrifice and uh, hard work, hustle, exhaustion is the way that you get there to wealth. So we have literally been skewed. We have been led astray in very, very deep ways. We've been disconnected from the ease of bringing all kinds of consciousness, abundance, and wealth into our lives. So that's where if we actually find our unique frequency of pleasure, which is not going to be the same for everyone, and we start applying that to all areas. This is what I'm saying. Relationship is one path. Money is one path, right? Our own self-love is one path. Our meditation time, our nature time is one path. Like there are so many paths that bring us pleasure. Childbirth is one path. Death is actually one path to pleasure. But we have become such a culture of fear and scarcity around death that we have pretty hard deaths. I mean, I remember when you were on my podcast and you talked about when you said the words and they had a good death. I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. That's what I freaking want. I want the good death because we're all going to have death. So if we add pleasure to it, if we start adding pleasure to money, money is no longer weaponized against us. We start with $5. We add pleasure to $5. It begins small. We always are going so big and we're like, but I don't have that, but I, right? And it's like, wait, look at what you have and amplify the pleasure in that. And Inara, this is so great that you said that because it actually came through that I was going to share a little story about this summer. In my own business, I was having a massive reckoning of the soul. And there were so many things that were not pleasurable anymore in my business that had started leaking into the hustle and grind. And it was getting harder and harder and harder. And the resistance was coming in. And for those of us in this work, we pay attention, right? It's like, okay, now we dig deep. Where's the exploration here? And I was out on my land. I was working with one of my gardens. And I had this moment because of podcasting, and I was like, okay, I pretended like I was on this big show, right? I was coming onto this big show. Maybe my book was out, whatever was happening. And I had them ask me a question. And the question that they asked me was, what signifies a good day for you? Just like when you said a good death, it was like, what's a really, really good day for you? And my answer was immediate. This is how your innate guidance system works. You don't have to really look for it. It's already there. It's already within you. And for me, it's literally being outside for the sunrise and the sunset both. I haven't missed a sunrise and sunset since then, and I have dramatically changed the way that I approach business. And it's the pleasure is actually in the moments of the journey. There's no destination. We've been sold that myth as well, that, oh, you'll get to the destination, then you'll have pleasure, then you'll be orgasmic, then you'll have ecstasy, and you won't have to worry anymore. And that actually keeps us small. It keeps us limited. And so when you realize that, when you find the pleasure in the journey, right, in those moments where you notice this state of resistance that does not work, that you're not feeling pleasure in anymore, how do you navigate and open the path back up to pleasure, however that looks in your life? Because that will, if I come back to the solo space without releasing a relationship, right, for some time, I trust that that's going to magnetize the greatest space of sacred pleasure in that path of a relationship, when it's divine, when it's meant to be. Because by that time, I am so clear in my energy. I am so clear in my unique pleasure principle or pleasure path or pleasure portal, that I'll know if it's a yes or no. Like, my body will know if it's a yes or no. My body will give me the answer when that, or if that person comes into my field. I don't have to figure it out. Like, by then, I'm already just being guided by the pleasure of my body, by the pleasure of this experience, by the pleasure of this magnificent planet, but, by the pleasure of night and day, by the pleasure of good sleep, by the pleasure of nutrition. Like, there are like the pleasure of soil, the pleasure of lavender. Like, there are so many spaces of pleasure. But when we actually put, and I look at this in sexuality and money, when we put sexuality and money as leading us, as ruling us, like, those two things have to be in a certain space or frequency or level in our life before we can rest and have pleasure, before we can find that space of ease. Like, we just have to keep going until those two things meet some end, some elusive end, and they rule us. You'll always be chasing it. You'll always be chasing it. But when it comes from within, those become a part of your experience in beautiful ways, in ways that you could have never expected, in ways that your mind could have not even comprehended, because your mind is working based on past experience and past hurts of relationships and what you don't want, and a lack frequency. But if you have pleasure that is really like living within your body, you're living from what's possible. You're living in abundance. You're living in a frequency that nobody can, I'll say F with, that nobody can F with. And that is a space of mastery. It's not a space of an end destination. It's a space of mastery. It's a space of trust. Like, I think the biggest place of pleasure is when we literally are in a space of trust. I've been talking to my clients about this and my membership about this. It's like, what offers you a soft nervous system? Amplify that. And I'm going to finish with this before we go back to you. I've seen that kind of go around sometimes when people are really relationship experts or people are talking about relationships. It's like, stop looking for the person that like lights you on fire. Look for the person that offers you a soft nervous system. Look for the person that offers you that feeling of safety, where you actually share what is pleasurable for you in a place of deep intimacy, in a place of deep, like, raw truth and vulnerability, because then you're unstoppable in every area of your life.
I'm so with you. I mean, it's profound. I think that we've been sold two streams of consciousness. One is, again, if you wait long enough, you work hard enough, you're always out there pushing, you'll get money, and sex. Both are power plays. And the distortion of that is the distortion of money, that there is enough for everybody on the planet. But if we look at the distortion of it, I saw figures today, and don't quote me because it was a reel, but it was a real reel. And this financial expert was saying 1% of the people in America, the billionaires, the trillionaires, own, hang on, let me get this right, 41 million people is equivalent to 1% of their money, right? So it's like it takes 41 million people to own a tiny little bit of money to get that into the same state that 1% of these billionaires running the universe. And now they're starting to, they could solve problems. They could solve the problems rather than looking how to get to frickin' Mars. How about feeding everybody on the planet? So the distortion of money as power is one thread and trajectory that we see. When we see sex and pleasure, actually, it's porn. And the addiction to porn is now causing neurotransmitters to be like, for a lot of young people who have no other way of learning about sex, and they're on the phone all the time, and they're just like, this is the focus, it's right here, there is no other energy of going out and socializing. In fact, they're anxious, they've got all sorts of problems that come up with that. So where they learn about sexuality rather than with themselves is porn. And porn causes this neurotransmitter, and it really is as simple as this. Some of the porn that I've seen is the worst example of pleasurable sex for me. The women are, it's like, okay, you usually don't kiss much, but you twiddle the nipples and then you get down, you do a little bit down there, and then it's this hard ramming, fuck, right? It's that simple. You were trying to be polite about not saying that word. I'll say it because it really needs to be like, that is what you get. And if then the guys go out after seeing endless porn and they don't know how to go sideways on this. What about sort of massage? What about sensual play? What about kissing for hours? They don't know how to do it. All they need to do is this. You go, mouth, nipples, down there, do this, do that, then you fuck really hard. What's happening is if they don't get that in sexual terms, they can't get off. And that is definitely for women one of the worst versions of sex, like missionary style, right? It's like being taught in porn, which is now becoming the education center for people for sensuality. And it ain't sensual. It's got nothing to do with pleasure, sensuality, and it often has nothing to do with the woman's pleasure whatsoever, right? It's just an archetype of a man banging a hole. So just to be blunt on that. So what we've got is, I actually have said this audaciously, but I believe that if people were in touch with pleasure, there would be no wars. And I mean it. It's like, who in their right mind or whatever body who is actually experiencing a level of pleasure on the planet, pleasure in their family, pleasure in their business, pleasure in their body and health, pleasure sleeping. Because when I was a yoga teacher for 18 years, the number one thing that people would complain to me was they don't sleep. So it's all this nervous anxiety stuff going on. And then you've got to force the money. Sex is like a, two-dimensional, just nothing. There's no real pleasure in it because they've only got a certain amount of time before they have to get back to the job, right? Rather than that kind of tantric experience of being fully immersed and not even going for orgasm. It's not even, that's not even the point, right? You're just lighting each other up. If people were trained, taught, women were empowered at that level, I think we would stop wars. And I want to talk slightly on a different topic about one of the things that has really helped me in life is ritual. I've been trained in ritual. I know Laurie's trained in ritual. I've been doing ritual for now I was trying to think about it today. It's like, yeah, like 40 years. 40 years. I started really young, and I appreciated the language of ritual is something that can take me deeply into a commitment to something, a connection to something. It's wordless, there is no language. It's on another dimension. But what it seals in is these deep experiences. And during ritual, when everything is so heightened and you're so focused because it's so heightened, because it's the soft zone, right? Even if it's a fire and it's electric and doing whatever you're doing, right? Being fascinating. It is that feminine receiving experience. It's into that I then started to imagine, well, what would be a ritual like if I started to bring in sensuality for self on the solo journey? And I will just refer back, this oil came out of that. It was the other way around. It wasn't like, ooh, I need to develop a product. It was nothing like that. It was the idea that I could take something, I could, for lack of a better word, I could go off and have a wank, right? That's very English. Um, if we were formal, it's like masturbation, which I hate that word. So all the sex words I don't really like very much. But if you ask somebody, okay, you go off for a wank, but how much pleasure do you have? That's often a thing about just getting off. Whereas if you ritualize it, so anyway, I think, and I can't even remember this, I think that the Queen's pleasure came out of my ritual side of thinking, if I want to enhance my experience as a solo woman, I'm not in a relationship, but I am still wanting to be captivated by sexuality, and I'm really good at it for myself. And everybody is usually really good at it for themselves. You can be your best lover. What would add some dimension into that to take it to another level? And I believe that was how this was born. It was coming out of ritual space. So over to you, ritual sister.
I mean, that's the reality. And when we can actually kind of break down ritual, because some people will have like a certain idea of what ritual means, but when you can break it down to actually watching the sunset, like that's a ritual. Watching the sunrise, that's a ritual. This morning I went outside. It was so gorgeous. It was like just pink and blue. Like the sun was really low, and then the moon was there and Mars was there. And just sitting under the power of that, like when you can find that kind of like space within yourself in that present moment, that's where everything is born. And that's where the greatest ideas are born. That's where, businesses are born. That's where relocations are born. That's where just joy and imagination and creativity is born. So of course that came through for you, and I love that so much. And that's where, when you can start living more of a ritualistic life, because here's the reality. The reality is, no matter how you feel about like the word ritual, we are ritualistic beings. We're habitual beings. So whatever we're doing, some kind of ritual or habit every single day, and whatever it is going to continue to amplify that energy or that frequency. So when you get intentional, like what the ritual you and I are talking about are deliberate and intentional, like you are really diving in, you're available. It's not multitasking. It's not like I'm doing one thing and doing another. It's like you are immersed in that moment. And that moment is where everything lives. And the thing is, like, I used to teach childbirth for many years. And one of the biggest reasons that we have a lot of challenge, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma in childbirth is because we have taken pleasure out of it. We don't even associate pleasure with it. Pleasure is the pinnacle of childbirth. Where pleasure comes from is when all of our hormones are actually in orchestra together. But we have been severing our hormonal cascade for so long based on this, what I don't know what you called it, but I'm calling it weaponization. I'm calling it vilification, like the way that we believe from the time that we're very young coming into the world. I mean, literally, we are born into a space that is not pleasurable. It's painful, it's fearful, it's stressful. It begins before we even take our first breath into this world. And I wanted to touch on what you talked about with how you feel like if we really got in touch with our pleasure, we would end wars. And you were talking about porn, but I want to take it a step further because I think this gets so overlooked so often. And I've been sitting with how I really want to share this in a very loud way. But the reality is until we change TV and movies, we will continue to believe that sex is painful, it's destructive, it's, you know, we continue to see people being sexually abused, and we normalize it in our TV. We normalize war in our TV. We make these into entertainment. We make these into our downtime, which is supposed to be our pleasure time, and we're filling it with all of this pain and atrocity and violence and anger and, you know, just imbalance, like full imbalance in this world. And until we start shifting that, it continues to be this place where it's like the local groups like us coming together, talking about it, spreading this word, spreading this frequency more and more, so that we become aware and we make new choices. We choose to go out to the sunset instead of watching that TV show or movie that continues to amplify this vilification or this weaponization, right? It's like, what's your stream of consciousness? Because you're the only one that can create a stream of consciousness that's going to support and amplify pleasure in your life. And I do want to share one more quick story because I think this is really important. And I don't know, I don't remember how old I was when I noticed this, but I was so flippin' happy about this. It was like this place of appreciation and gratitude. When I was young and I was first wanking, I'm going to use your word. When I was
Americans don't
first
say that, do they?
they don't, but it's fun. I'm
It's in
into it. I'm
English.
here for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, why I was doing it. I was just doing it, right? That's like what happens with kids. It's not like it was like premeditated or anything. It was just happening. Um, and my grandmother caught me. I guess I'll quote caught me or found me, right? And she was horrified. She chased me. She was like yelling and she chased me. And I still remember this. I ran into my bedroom and I slammed the door shut and I locked the door, and she was like yelling on the other side of the door. And my parents somehow found out about this. I think grandma ended up going and telling them about it and was like, you have to do something about this. And my parents defended me. They said, leave her
Oh,
alone.
oh,
I didn't find this out till years and years later, right? As an adult. And I'm like, oh, that's incredible. Like that is
incredible.
empowering, even though I didn't even know that they defended me and told her to leave me alone, right? And there's another thing that happened in my childhood is we got raised, we had this like little lake house, right? And we kind of got raised there. And so we were basically in our swimsuits all the time. My family had zero body shame. And I've enjoyed a life of zero body shame. Like I am very, very comfortable naked. I'm very, very comfortable with my body. And these are the moments that it's like when you can recognize this, even recognize the opposite, where it may have been very opposite for you as a child, you actually have the ability to go back and heal that for yourself. You do not have to live with that forever, but it takes us recognizing it first. It takes us bringing it up to feel it and release it, because usually you were talking about subconsciously, right? So we're holding that in our subconscious and it's taking a piece of our energy and it's creating stories around all of these paths that Inara and I are talking about. So when you can, it's like this radical, like vulnerability, transparency, like really let yourself bring it up, let yourself feel it and let yourself let it go, because we're not here to carry the burdens of our parents, our grandparents, the lineage, even the burdens of our younger lives, but we are here to heal it. And pleasure is a path to that. I've actually been using I do tons of money mindset work and I love it. Right? It's such a shift when you start to love money instead of feel like it's evil and it hates you and all of these things about it, right? It's hard to get, but I've started to add pleasure in. Like I've even decided, like I haven't quite fully committed to this, but I feel like I'm going to do like a 30-day pleasure solo challenge where every day I find the space for like full what we're talking about, like wanking, like full pleasure for myself, because I find pleasure in so many other areas of my life. But
Yeah.
I want to, it's like, because I have been solo for so long and I have no need, I have trust that it's going to come when it comes, because I've done all this deep work, this foundational root work. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? I want to play with this. I want to see what happens when I really amplify this frequency in my life for 30 days, 40 days, and see what happens around me. You start to realize what a magnificent, magical being you are, and how you really are the creator of your world, of your life, of your experience when you come within, which brings me back to the beginning.
Yeah. And I think, when you think about somebody who is deep in pleasure, like, just think about a teenage girl or boy who they've just, they've got a crush and they've just bumped into that crush and they've had that little conversation or whatever. And as they walk away from that conversation, they are just flying on the energy of like, oh, possibility. Everything is open. There's no problem. It's like, woo, that energy is what we want to tap into right there. And when was the last time you felt that? You know, me, I'm feeling that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That sense of, I guess mystery and sensuality and all of that. And this was that journey that I went on, actually creating the oils. And I said the other day, it was in some kind of Instagram post that I was talking about, when I still don't know why I created it, right? At all. I have no memory. And in every business, I have a memory of exactly why I did something. This is like, I have no idea. Why would I do this? Bizarre. It was like a download. And I went at it. I'd been interested in kind of solving the relationship problem for ages, for years, actually. But what happened was I sort of went into this whole pleasure thing, and in an area that I'm good at, which is business, and the space I would say of relationships, what you would consider I'm not good at, right? It's my area which I've found challenging, or I haven't met the right person or whatever. Instead of focusing in that area, the lack bit, the bit that isn't working, I ended up quite naturally going, oh, well, it's okay. It's a business idea. So great. So I'll do the designs. And then it's, I had my neighbor, it was hilarious. A neighbor guy, I said, he's a graphic designer, and I wasn't happy with the design. And I said, can you get the yoni to shine? And he said, what's a yoni? And I was like, oh, I have to really actually say vagina. I was like, so thank you, Lee. You made the vagina shine. There were all these little bits that, had to happen for me to produce this. And it was like a whole learning thing. So I was totally focused on the oils in business, then the biodegradable packaging and the design on top, which is my favorite bit. All of this, I end up going on this journey. And then as I was using the oil and using it on so many levels, not just, yes, on myself, but I was going to talks and I was talking about the oil. And then women would say, hey, I want to try it right now. It was hilarious. We would be sitting in a circle. Next thing I know, the oil would go around. I'd be talking business. They'd be trying it on their nipples in this kind of like public. It wasn't public, but you know what I mean? It was like it was unreal. And all of a sudden, the vibe with men changed. It was like, so when you are looking at the thing that you're trying to produce a result in, it's often the thing it's like head banging all the time, oh, that date didn't work out. When you're looking at in an area that you're really good at, so whatever that would be, maybe it's family, I don't know. But for me, it was like, oh, I'm putting that through the rinse of business or the identity of business. And then I'm not confronted at all, because business is the thing I'm good at. I'm just used to it. All of a sudden, I start to notice the men's reactions, because I'm into men. Just to be clear, it could be anybody you're into. But all of a sudden, I was meeting men at a very different level. And I was thinking, this is kind of wild. And then, it's led to many things, of which I'm not going to tell you. But what I will say is that the vibe is, I just went to town on my own pleasure. And the context was not the problem context that I was working with. And all of a sudden, the shift in my energy, really is noticeable on the street with men. Like men who smile at me, men who I had a wonderful experience recently. I was right beside somebody else at a traffic jam. The car was beside me. And I just looked sideways, and there's this guy, and he goes, like, he starts doing this to me, and I start laughing. And it was just like, just pure delight and pleasure of this really nice interaction. So that's where I feel this is leading to, that permission to go into your pleasure zones, permission to go there, permission to turn this thing off, turn it off, and go play.
Yeah. Well, also it's actually, if I come back to our ritual talk, it's coming into this space where you hear the innate guidance, because whatever it is that you're desiring deep within, your innate guidance is sending you messages of how to get there, but it's not the same as what your mind thinks is going to take you there. And so
Yeah.
our mind is always trying to force, right? This is what we've learned: control, force, expectation. And that is a much, much longer, oftentimes lonelier path there. But when you listen to the innate guidance, it's going to open some kind of creativity portal within you. So it opens the energy, which amplifies the frequency. Like I said, I trust my frequency is opening. I trust the divine timing. And I trust, even if it's not in this lifetime, it's such a beautiful, powerful place to be, where I trust. Like, I
Right
trust
on.
it, and I get
I
to have
so
pleasure
get that.
every single day, and it's not dependent on the thing that the society or the culture has created an expectation about. And then
Yeah.
I get to offer that to other women, to other people, through my own experience, just from them feeling that reverberation of that strength, that belief, that truth, and that trust that lives within me. So it's like, once you just start amplifying the energy in an area of your life, it's going to lead you somewhere when you trust it, because that's the innate guidance. It will continue to give you more ideas, more paths. It will continue. You don't have to look for it. That's pleasurable, to not have to look for something and force it. And you're just like, all right, let's go. The path is getting laid and I am here.
Yes.
The brain is there to do the inspired action. It's like the brain does it after the inspiration comes through. But the brain
Yeah.
has been trying to decide what it is, and that will never take us in our soul's blueprint. And the last thing I want to say is, like, this was very intentional. I wore my silk shirt just to
Ooh.
amplify the energy of pleasure. Like, it was a very intentional purchase, and I wanted to feel this frequency, right? And so it's like, look at those things, like, be intentional in something in your life that it just brings what Inara is talking about. It brings that frequency, that energy of pleasure that you feel, and this is manifestation work. You start
Yeah.
applying it to all of those dreams and desires.
Well, I think we've covered some very interesting things. I've taught you a new word. Um, if you're a bit upset by that, don't worry, your neighbors. I mean, there are much worse words, but I quite like that one. It's so English, it's so cute.
It is.
Um, we will end it here, and Laurie will be doing an activation actually on Valentine's Day itself. And I'll leave it there because I'd actually like a bit of a mystery rather than it just be, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. She will be doing something you don't want to miss. And I can't wait. And thank you so much. And
Thank
every
you.
one of you, just go and ...
Thank you so much, Inara. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, darling. Always a pleasure.